5, and I'm very, very grateful to have Julie, the great Julie Brown, with me today. We thought we would do a roundup of where we are with all things Epstein, because it's been several weeks since you and I have spoken, Julie. You've done some great reporting that we want to get into. We've had Bill Gates testify to Congress today. I want to talk about that. We had Leslie Groff yesterday. You and I haven't chatted since Sarah Kellen gave her very interesting testimony. And meanwhile, you've gone out and, among other things, interviewed police chief Reiter. And I thought that was fascinating. So where to even begin? Should we knock out this week's events? I mean, the Gates testimony today. What did you make of? We haven't yet seen the transcript. We will. But what's your take on what he said so far?
I've been listening to some of the lawmakers today who have been in on the questioning. And, the takeaway that I have is here you have one of the most powerful and wealthiest men in the whole world. And he is telling Congress that he was manipulated essentially by Jeffrey Epstein, hoodwinked by him, that he was, the same thing we have heard time and time again from these victims, that he manipulated. And one of the things that I hear too often from people is, how did these women who were in their early 20s, they were overage, not to mention the victims who were younger, talk about the women who were victimized by Epstein when they were, of age, but they were young. And so, sometimes people say, well, how could they let that happen? They were of age, they were consenting adults. Well, look, you have one of the most powerful men in the world who also was manipulated by him. So why not hard to understand that he could have even manipulated these women even more? And why was Epstein trying to get money from, there was business deals going on between them apparently, or at least he was hoping that Epstein could bring money to his foundation. So these are all people that felt that Epstein could help them in one way or another, connect people who were powerful. So I just think of the victims, and I think about how, it's not hard to understand how they got manipulated, because they were far more vulnerable than someone like Bill Gates.
Right. I also think what's really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands on the transcript, is, Gates has said that Epstein knew about his extramarital affairs and used that as leverage, which brings us back to something we haven't, talked about in recent weeks and months, which is, this notion that Epstein possibly blackmailed the rich and powerful around him, as well as obviously, name dropping and terrifying the vulnerable. And I think, I'm particularly interested in this woman, Melanie Walker. Wall Street Journal did some fabulous reporting about her earlier in the week. I've reported on her. But it does seem, from the reporting that's coming out of an investigation being done by the Gates Foundation into all this, that Jeffrey Epstein she was his protege. He created her. She stayed in one of his apartments when she was in New York going through medical school. It seems that, Epstein virtually, number one, it was Ghislaine Maxwell who introduced her to Prince Andrew, and she started dating Prince Andrew. Epstein then sends her out into the Gates world to attend a dinner party that Prince Andrew's at. Shortly after that dinner party, she dates Steven Sinofsky, who was the number 3 at Microsoft. And then it appears as she sort of gets closer and closer to Bill Gates, eventually she winds up dating Bill Gates. And all the while, Jeffrey Epstein is sort of controlling the puppet strings. I mean, it's extraordinary. And I think that it shows the lengths that he was prepared to go to exercise control over Bill Gates. And let's not forget, actually, when one of the things that he did, which was interpreted sort of as an FU to Gates after Jeffrey Epstein died, was that he left this guy, Boris Nikolic, who had worked for Bill Gates and who again, Melanie Walker had sort of put in Epstein's crosshairs. He'd made Boris Nikolic the trustee, the executor of his estate, and Boris Nikolic was horrified, didn't understand why that had happened, and interpret it as it was Epstein trying to get back at Bill Gates for kind of ignoring him in the last few years of his life, try to get back at him from beyond the grave. So I do think it's really, really interesting. And I'm glad that Robert Garcia has come out and said that there are now going to be further interviews based on what Bill Gates told Congress.
Well, also remember that Bill Gates, one of the things that Bill Gates has been saying or indicating, and there's even indications in the files that Epstein was using some kind of leverage over him. And remember when the Trump administration made the announcement in July of last year, we're closing the case. And we see no evidence at all of blackmailing, that Epstein was blackmailing. And here now we're getting evidence that he was blackmailing.
Well, he was yes, I mean, he was doing everything exactly, and yes, he was. And so, yeah, I mean, I think anyway, really, really looking forward to getting the transcript of this. And let's talk about Leslie Groff yesterday. I think you and I are both skeptical about Leslie Groff, and I'll stick my hand up. I'll tell you why. Why it's not just sort of a hypothetical. When I went to meet Jeffrey Epstein in the fall of 2002, and when I went to his house and had tea with him, and when I got home after that evening, it was Leslie Groff who phoned me up and said, "I just wanted to let you know that Jeffrey thought you were so pretty." And by the way, I was pregnant with twins, but I would posit that for an assistant to say that to someone who's just been to visit her boss, I think that's pretty inappropriate.
Yeah, yeah. And how many times has she done that with other women
Exactly.
on his behalf?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, right there, I was like, okay, that, whoa, something off. But what did, I mean, we know that she has said she didn't see or know about anything untoward. Your take on that?
Well, I don't think that you have to see anything to know that you're arranging for women to have sex with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, she certainly knew what was up. She knew what was going on. Even if she wants to claim that she sort of compartmentalized the fact that she was an assistant for Epstein. You can't ignore all the publicity that had been happening over the years, that all these girls that were suing him, the whole Alan Dershowitz versus Virginia Giuffre thing. I mean, she's a very smart woman. She knew what was happening. She knew what her role was in ad. She tried to keep herself, I think, clean, and not get herself, but she knew. She absolutely knew. And she helped enable him because I've said many, many times Jeffrey Epstein could not have done this by himself. I mean, he had butlers to tie his shoes for him.
Yeah.
Sarah Kellen, who testified the week earlier, the things that he was making her do were crazy, like trying to find things for him. And if she couldn't get what he told her to do, he would be screaming and yelling at her. And so there's no way that she didn't know what was going on.
So which brings me to sort of two questions. One, what is the value then of a testimony? I mean, again, I hope we see her transcript. I mean, presumably, if she's caught in a lie to Congress, that's a very big deal. But, what do you think will be the ultimate point of all these testimonies? If people like Leslie Groff come in and say, I didn't see anything, is that just the end of it, do you think, Julie?
I don't think this story will ever end, but I do think that this is to some degree a little bit of a waste of time because they're not swearing these people in. And yeah, technically you can't lie to Congress, but I think it's going to be very hard for them to prosecute someone who isn't sworn in. I think it's a loophole that they're going to use to get away with not being completely honest. And I just think I don't understand why they're not making these witnesses, take an.
I didn't actually. Wow. Okay, that's a very big deal.
Yeah, no, they're not doing that, and that's what Representative Garcia has been making that point over and over. Bondi too. That they didn't make her take an oath that she had to tell the truth. So it gives us little crumbs, but I don't think that you're under the same kind of pressure to tell the truth when you're not sworn in. And none of these witnesses have been sworn in that I know of.
Right. Well, my other question was about the non-prosecution agreement, because obviously Leslie Groff, and we don't know if she was aware. Sarah Kellen said she wasn't aware that she was part of the non-prosecution agreement that was struck in 2008. I guess we have to wait for Leslie Groff's transcript to see that. But I was really interested. So let's talk about, before we talk about Sarah Kellen, let's talk about your interview with Police Chief Reiter. Because I thought what he said at the end, the changes he believes need to be made to the system to stop this ever happening again, were actually very interesting. And one of them was about, this idea that you shouldn't be allowed to strike a deal for immunity around these kind of cases.
Right, right. Well, he's been living this case for over 20 years. He's really, in my mind, sort of an a quiet hero in this because he like the publicity. This was a rare time that he actually spoke details about what happened during that time. I interviewed him previously, but he was very reluctant. He was not the easiest person to interview back then because there were only certain things he wanted to talk about. This time he really unburdened himself. And I think part of the reason he did that was when he was reading these files that were coming out, he was pouring through them. He was just, you know, outraged by what he saw in these files. And I think that that made him feel like I have to say something because not only are there's things in there that didn't happen, that infuriated him, but there's also, people that were involved with Epstein, after the deal was done and everybody knew that he was a sex predator. There's certainly evidence that a lot of people try to either initiate or they did engage in personal or social and or financial relationships with Epstein. And he's he I think that prompted him to talk a little bit more in depth about what had happened back then.
Right. Well, and I understood. I mean, everyone, I'm going to post Julie's post when I post this interview later. I'll post a link to what she wrote. Because I mean, he did, I know he pointed to the examples of what happened to me and John Connolly as examples of why he didn't think if he gave you an interview in the early days, it would actually ever materialize.
Right.
But I also thought his point about that he was very unhappy about the fact that it could easily appear to people that it looked as if the cops hadn't done the job, that
Right.
that, and he wanted to correct the record, I think, on that, and totally understandable.
Right.
Um,
Even a couple of the, Representative Massey said something at one point, "We're gonna go after the cops too." And, that's an indication he didn't understand the story because the Palm Beach police chief, Michael Ryder, and his detective, who's now passed away, they were standing alone in trying to prosecute, arrest and convict Epstein back in 2006 and 7. They went out on a limb, put
Yeah.
together a case, but it wasn't their decision. It was taken out of their hands by the state prosecutor he wanted to let him off with a misdemeanor.
Mm,
Wasn't for them, uh, it wouldn't have gone to the feds at all.
mm. Well, I'm going to post it afterwards, everyone. So either read it on Julie's Substack, the best of all, read it on Julie's Substack. I'll post it as well because it is very interesting. It's also I thought it was really interesting that he said that and this is the man who is overseeing the interviews of these young girls firsthand, and that he was so horrified that they were branded, that Epstein tried to tarnish them as prostitutes and liars. And we know that from Alan Dershowitz, that is what the Epstein legal team tried to do. And so that had great meaning for me, actually, because he was in the room. Um, so, Sarah Kellen, um, what did you make of that? I mean, she's always been such a tricky one for me because there's no question. We know that she went out and procured girls for Jeffrey Epstein. But there's also always been this question as to whether or not she was herself a victim. And, I think definitely her testimony, I read the transcript a couple of times. Hard to argue against the idea she was a victim in my mind. What did you think?
Well, I have done a lot of homework years ago on her, and I knew that she came from a Jehovah's Witness family, and she was essentially cast out of the family because she, got involved with a boy when she was in high school, and they basically just threw her out. And so she was, she was involved in sort of a cultish kind of growing up where she didn't have any social, they weren't allowed to fraternize with
Yeah.
anything like that with all the rules. I actually watched a documentary on the Jehovah's Witnesses, after when I was doing this work. And I came to just realize that she was learning since the time she was a child, she was being manipulated. So it's not hard to understand that when she has no money and she's living on the relationship broke up with the man that she, left home with, and she was on her own and having trouble making ends meet. No, she meets a woman who says, "I know this man. He wants to hire an assistant." And, off to the races. She meets him, and before she knows it, he's sexually abusing her too. And then, the way that she gets out of being repeatedly raped is to work as his assistant and keep herself busy in that way. And she was with him. I've been with him one of the longest people in his life.
Yeah.
Both her and Groff were with him for a very long time. So these are the two people that probably knew him almost better than anybody else. And I think felt trapped and did
Well, you could see, I mean, in the way she described, she was trapped.
yeah.
I mean, she was sitting there. I mean, and even actually, I was struck by when she meets this racing car driver
Mhm.
and they get married. But even then, Epstein is the one negotiating the prenup because the racing car driver has all the money. And I mean, it's like she's a pawn being passed from one wealthy guy to another. I mean, it's a different kind of
Right.
cage.
Well, yeah. Yeah. I could see that too when I was doing my research on her. And you know what? It's not just her. A lot of the victims went into relationships like that. They went from Epstein to another man that also manipulated them or controlled them. I mean, this is part of the pattern of the abuse that they suffered.
Yeah, because now that marriage, her second marriage has ended, and I don't think she's got anything right. I mean, I think it's yeah, she's back to. I mean, it is a really tragic story. And now, because Julie, we're not going to go as long as usual today because Julie has to be on air at 5, and I have to be on air at 6. I'm different. So, um, but I'm sure you read Maggie the New York Times excerpt, right?
I haven't read it. I just heard about it.
Okay. Well, I'll give you the greatest hits because it's about how everyone around Trump tried to, obviously in vain to control the fallout around the Epstein files. And the real the gem for me is that JD Vance in one meeting thought it would be a great idea for Tucker Carlson to interview Ghislaine Maxwell.
I,
I
I,
mean,
and
your
then
thoughts?
yes, Blanche, right? And which
Yes,
is what actually did happen.
yes, yes.
So, but yeah, the figure in here that always sort of slips under the radar is Ghislaine Maxwell. She knows everything. And, it's interesting to see what will happen with her because I do think that she's, has dangled that out there that she has something on either Trump or somebody close to him, people that are in his orbit. And so it will be interesting to see what happens when she, right before he leaves office
I
or
know you and I'm on the other side of this. I think he won't do anything because I just think he's so transactional and it's not in his best interest. But I to your point, however, it is interesting that, Sarah Kellen talked about how much she disliked Ghislaine Maxwell and how closed off she was from her, and also about the abuse, right, that she
right,
described with Ghislaine as well as Jeffrey Epstein.
right,
And then it is interesting to me that when I wrote a piece for Rolling Stone about Melanie Walker and Jeffrey Epstein's relationship to Bill Gates, Melanie Walker had a publicist who phoned me up and said, one of you've got following facts need to be corrected. This before it was published. And one of them was that I had said Jeffrey Epstein had introduced Melanie to Prince Andrew. And the publicist said, no, no, no. It was somebody else. It was another friend. Well, it turns out that the friend was Ghislaine Maxwell. So
right,
it's like, and so, but you see how together they're pulling these sort of levers of power and influence to manipulate this global elite
right,
around them.
right,
So big difference. It wasn't Jeffrey Epstein. It was Ghislaine. I mean, it's the same thing.
right, right. They were still in the same, in the same bed together, so to speak.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that whole crowd, there's a lot of people who were in the room, who know what was happening here, that there was money laundering, there was sex trafficking. I mean, there is a email in the files that Epstein kind of wrote to himself where he's saying, and he wrote it to himself, but I really believe it was a draft of what he wanted Boris to say uh, to Bill Gates because they were having a breakup,
Yeah.
and he was saying, uh, Boris was saying, "You made me do all these unethical things. You made as some of them bordered on being illegal." I mean, it's really interesting because you know Bill Gates had this sterling reputation, and here is his right hand guy basically saying he got drugs for him to help him with, with an STD he
Right.
got from a Russian prostitutes or Russian women. And so he denied that today. I'm told he denied that he had an STD. Um, so it's just interesting to see, to some degree, in the files how the dirty laundry is.
Right. But and also though, I was Epstein's desperation to get to Bill Gates. And, one wonders, we've got Leon Black, who was sort of paying the bills after Epstein. It was Les Wexner, one billionaire before Jeffrey Epstein went to jail. Then it's Leon Black who seems to be funding Jeffrey Epstein in the years until his death. But, I was like, why is Epstein so desperate? Okay, so Bill Gates sort of broke up with him.
Right.
Why does, okay, move on next. But no, I mean, this seems to have really rankled. And he then sends in Melanie Walker. Someone asked Melanie Walker, we were talking earlier, was Jeffrey Epstein's protege who he sent into the Gates's orbit. She winds up sleeping with Gates. And it's clear from these text messages that have emerged and were reported in the Wall Street Journal that Epstein was trying to use their relationship as leverage. For what? I mean, was he hoping that Bill Gates would be benefactor number 3? I mean,
Right. Yes, because there's some emails in there where, I think he's writing to Boris actually, where he's saying how Bill's finances are a mess and he doesn't know what he's doing with his money. So he absolutely, that's exactly what he did with Leon Black.
yes, exactly.
Insinuate himself into his financial picture by saying, you don't know what you're doing. You're investing this all wrong. You're losing money. And it sounds like that's exactly what Epstein was trying to do with Bill Gates. And then when Bill Gates didn't want to do it, then he tried hardball, trying to
Right.
other things like women as leverage. And, you have to wonder how many other men he did this to. You know that he was an expert at this. So he couldn't have just done it with Bill Gates. He did it with other men too.
Well, it's very interesting. So we've got Leon Black coming on June 26th. We know that there are going to be other people interviewed. Actually, there was one thing I did want to say, which is possibly a little bit of a news item, that Sarah Kellen mentioned 3 names, right, of men.
Right.
She alleged that Frederick Fekkai had raped her, and he was the conduit. He was the person who introduced her to Jeffrey Epstein. And she also mentioned Levine.
Right. Philip Levine,
Philip,
Miami Beach mayor, who also ran for governor. Uh,
right.
and yeah, and then they decided to open up an investigation into them. And then the photographer, whose name?
Patrick Demarchelier. So here's what I will say. Philip Levine was somebody whose name was definitely given to me back in 2002 for the original Vanity Fair piece as somebody that Epstein knew well. So make that and I think I spoke to him and he was very cagey at the time. Frederick Fekkai is really interesting. Because, and here's why, Frederick Fekkai for many years dated a billionaire who's now dead called Libet Johnson. When I was doing my Vanity Fair piece in 2002, I found all these deeds on parcels of land up in upstate New York, sort of, that for whatever reason were co-owned by Jeffrey Epstein and Libet Johnson. And it became quite obvious to me that Jeffrey Epstein had finagled his way in to managing her money. And I've been told by sources that the results of that were actually catastrophic for her heirs, for the estate. And so it was very interesting to me when Sarah Kellen mentioned Frederick Fekkai, and I guess there'll now be an investigation. He's denied it. But actually what I remembered was, again, you can see Jeffrey Epstein pulling the strings. He probably put Fekkai and Libet Johnson together. And it was a way to get to Libet Johnson's money.
Right. I mean, he was a real con man, let's face it, a successful one at that, in the sense that he bilked people out of a lot of money
Yeah.
from. This is also, I might add, really why it is important that Senator Ron Wyden, as you know, has been quote unquote following the money and trying to get the Treasury Department to turn over their files on his, Epstein's financial records,
Yeah.
because that will really show you who was involved. And the Trump administration is refusing to release those files, the Treasury files. So,
Right. Which we really need, actually.
yeah, yeah.
Really, really need.
Some ways I would argue that, they're probably the most important.
Right. Because without the money, there would not have been this horrendous pyramid scheme of abuse.
Right.
Julie, anything else I want to let you go so you can breathe before you go on air. Anything else you want to touch on?
Oh, I think we did a lot in a short period.
All right. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And we will be back when there's more to say.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.